A beggar with a baby approached a millionaire and told him not to travel with his wife. The next day, he bought her a house. The sun glinted off the polished surface of the luxury car as it purred to a halt in front of a grand mansion. Its owner, Marcus Albright, stepped out, his tailored suit exuding wealth and power. With a confident stride, he approached the marble staircase leading to his sprawling estate, the epitome of modern opulence. But his path was interrupted. A frail woman, her face weathered with age and hardship, approached hesitantly. She clutched a small baby bundled in a worn blanket, while a wide-eyed 5-year-old boy clung to her skirt. Her presence was a stark contrast to the grandeur around her, a living testament to survival against all odds. "Sir, please," her voice cracked with a mix of fear and urgency, her frail hands trembling as she held onto the baby. "Hey, I need to speak to you." Marcus paused, his brow furrowed. He glanced at the woman, then at his security guards hovering nearby. For a moment, the bustling sounds of the city faded into silence as their gazes locked. "Make it quick," he said, his tone curt but not entirely dismissive. She nodded, drawing a deep, shaky breath. The little boy peeked up at Marcus, his eyes wide and innocent, but tinged with the shadow of hunger. "Please, sir," the woman stammered, her words barely above a whisper. "It's about tomorrow, about your trip." The frail woman's words caught Marcus off guard. He straightened his posture, looking down at her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. Her grip on the baby tightened, as though drawing strength from the tiny bundle in her arms. "Please," she pleaded, her eyes filling with desperation. "You mustn't travel tomorrow with your wife. You're in grave danger." The statement hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus's expression hardened, his initial curiosity giving way to doubt. Was this some sort of scam? He had encountered plenty of beggars spinning elaborate tales for money, but something about her tremulous voice, her weathered face, and the sheer urgency in her tone made him hesitate. "How do you know about my plans?" he demanded, his sharp eyes studying her intently. "I just do," she said, her words trembling as though she were carrying the weight of the world. "I had to warn you. Please trust me. Don't go. Stay safe." The little boy tugged at her skirt, his voice barely audible. "Nana, are we okay?" She shushed him gently, her gaze never leaving Marcus's. "You don't have to believe me," she continued, her voice cracking. "But if you love your wife, you'll listen." Marcus shook his head, taking a step back. "This is absurd," he muttered, though his words lacked the conviction of someone entirely unconvinced. "Sir," she called out again, desperation spilling from her voice. "Please, just this once, don't ignore me. You'll see that I'm not lying." Marcus turned sharply on his heel, his polished shoes clicking against the stone pavement. "Take care of her," he instructed his security guards, dismissing the interaction with a wave. But as he climbed the stairs and entered his home, the woman's words clung to him, stubbornly refusing to fade into the background. Marcus sat alone in his expansive study that evening, nursing a glass of fine whiskey. The warm, amber liquid swirled lazily in the crystal tumbler, but his mind wasn't on its taste. The woman's words echoed in his head like a haunting refrain. "You're in grave danger." He leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Ridiculous," he muttered aloud, attempting to dismiss her warning. Yet, a seed of doubt had taken root, stubborn and persistent. Why would a beggar, a stranger, risk humiliation to approach him with such a dire claim? How could she possibly have known about his plans to travel tomorrow? Marcus shook his head, trying to shrug off the unease gnawing at him. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. Tomorrow's itinerary stared back at him, a business trip to finalize an international merger. His wife, Evelyn, had insisted on accompanying him for some much-needed time together. Their marriage had been strained of late, and this trip felt like an opportunity to reconnect. He rubbed his temples, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. She's just trying to scam me, he told himself again. But deep down, something about the woman's eyes, the quiet certainty in them, unnerved him. Marcus exhaled sharply and stood, determined to shake off the feeling. Enough of this nonsense, he declared, draining the last of his whiskey. But even as he climbed into bed that night beside Evelyn, her peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight, he couldn't quiet his thoughts. The beggar woman's voice whispered through his dreams, and by morning, Marcus awoke with a heavy heart. Long before she became the frail figure who approached Marcus, the woman, Eliza, had lived a very different life. Once a loving grandmother and caretaker, she had been surrounded by family in a small, cozy home filled with warmth and laughter. But tragedy struck like a thief in the night. A drunk driver caused the accident that claimed her daughter and son-in-law, leaving Eliza as the sole guardian of her 5-year-old grandson Liam. As if fate hadn't already dealt her a cruel hand, she found an abandoned infant on her doorstep just weeks later, a baby with no name, no note, only a desperate cry for help in the darkness. Eliza couldn't bring herself to turn the child away. Life unraveled quickly. Without her daughter's income or her own health to rely on, Eliza lost her home. The city's streets became their refuge, a place where every day was a fight for survival. Her once strong frame grew frail as she skipped meals to feed the children. She shielded them from the harsh realities of their situation as best she could, inventing bedtime stories of magical kingdoms where kindness triumphed and hunger was banished. Through it all, her fierce love for the children burned bright. Liam's laughter, despite the weight of their struggles, and the baby's toothless smiles kept her going. Eliza learned to read the world around her with uncanny precision, watching people, interpreting signs, and trusting her gut to avoid danger. Her streetwise intuition, honed over years of hardship, sometimes felt like an inexplicable sixth sense. It was this feeling, this gut-wrenching certainty, that had driven her to approach Marcus that fateful day. The children didn't understand her urgency, but they clung to her, trusting her implicitly. Eliza had made a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would protect them. Marcus Albright's world was light years away from Eliza's struggles. He lived in a realm of shimmering glass towers and high-stakes boardrooms, where his decisions moved millions of dollars and shaped entire industries. Yet, despite his material wealth, his personal life felt as hollow as the echo of his footsteps in his massive home. Evelyn, his wife, had once been his greatest confidant, a vibrant partner who shared his dreams and ambitions. But over the years, their relationship had begun to drift, worn thin by the demands of his career and their differing priorities. They had tried to patch things up with vacations, gifts, and grand gestures, but the emotional distance remained. Marcus found himself restless, even as his life appeared picture-perfect from the outside. He had everything anyone could want, a fleet of cars, private jets, a sprawling mansion, but a sense of disconnection lingered, gnawing at him in quiet moments. He often asked himself, is this it? Is this all life has to offer? Evelyn had suggested joining him on his business trip tomorrow, a rare chance to spend time together. She had joked, maybe if I shadow you, I'll finally get to see what's so exciting about these endless meetings. He had smiled at her attempt to lighten the mood, but part of him worried she was losing patience with him entirely. It was against this backdrop of wealth and relational strain that Marcus encountered Eliza. The stark contrast between their lives was like a mirror to his soul. He had dismissed her, of course, but her warning stuck with him, an uncomfortable thorn in his otherwise carefully curated existence. As Marcus replayed the encounter in his mind, he found himself dwelling not on the warning itself but on the woman's piercing gaze, the unshakable conviction in her voice. Could someone from her world really know something about his future? The next morning, Marcus stood in his grand foyer, luggage neatly packed and ready for the trip. Evelyn descended the marble staircase, radiant in a tailored travel outfit, her enthusiasm a rare spark in their strained interactions. "Are you ready?" she asked, flashing him a bright but tentative smile. Marcus hesitated. The memory of the beggar's warning resurfaced with startling clarity. You mustn't travel tomorrow with your wife. You're in grave danger. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it as absurdity, but the unease was undeniable. I've been thinking, he began, his voice careful. I'm not feeling well. I think I'll stay behind. Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her brow furrowing. You're staying. But this deal is important. You've been preparing for weeks. I know, Marcus said, adjusting his tie nervously. But I don't want to risk getting worse and jeopardizing the negotiations. I'd feel better if you went ahead without me. I'll catch up in a day or two. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You're sure? Yes, he replied firmly, though his stomach churned with uncertainty. I'll be fine. Just keep me updated, okay? Reluctantly, Evelyn agreed, and Marcus watched as she stepped into the waiting car, its sleek design disappearing down the long driveway. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, unsure if he'd just made the right decision or fallen victim to a stranger's theatrics. Later that day, as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, his phone buzzed. It was a call from Evelyn's assistant, her voice trembling with panic. Mr. Albright, there's been an accident. The car. It went off the road. Marcus's heart stopped. Is Evelyn? She's alive, the assistant assured him quickly, but she's in the hospital. It was a miracle she wasn't more seriously hurt. His breath caught. The beggar's warning had been real. Marcus paced the waiting room of the hospital, his nerves frayed. Evelyn was stable, the doctors assured him, though she'd suffered a mild concussion and some bruises. She's very lucky, one of them had said. A few more feet, and the car would have gone over the cliff. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He replayed the chain of events in his mind. The beggar woman's warning, his decision to stay behind, and now this near tragedy. Had he ignored her plea, he might have been in that car too. Or worse, his presence could have changed the outcome entirely. Marcus, Evelyn's voice called weakly from the hospital bed as he entered her room. He rushed to her side, clasping her hand. I'm here, he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. How are you feeling? Dazed, she admitted with a faint smile, but mostly grateful. The driver swerved to avoid something in the road. I don't know how we didn't go over the edge. Her words, though comforting, only deepened his turmoil. The beggar's warning had been too specific to dismiss as coincidence. Marcus stayed with Evelyn until she drifted off to sleep, then quietly left the hospital, his mind racing with questions. The next morning Marcus made a decision. He had to find the woman who had saved his life. Returning home, Marcus mobilized every resource at his disposal. His security team, private investigators, and even his driver were tasked with scouring the city for the beggar woman. She's elderly, carries a baby, and has a young boy with her, he told them. She approached me yesterday outside the house. 4 hours he waited for updates. By evening, one of his investigators called. We've found someone matching the description near Westbrook Avenue. She's sitting by the fountain at the park. Marcus wasted no time. He arrived at the park just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the area in a golden glow. There she was, Eliza, sitting on a worn bench, the baby nestled in her arms and Liam perched beside her. She looked up as Marcus approached, her expression cautious but calm. You, Marcus said, his voice filled with urgency. You knew about the accident. How? Eliza studied him, her gaze unflinching. I told you, she replied quietly. I just knew. Her simple answer only deepened his curiosity. That's not good enough, he pressed. You saved my life. I need to understand how you knew. What made you come to me? Eliza hesitated, then gestured to the bench beside her. Sit, she said. It's a long story. Marcus lowered himself onto the bench, the weight of his questions pressing heavily on his shoulders. Eliza adjusted the baby in her arms, glancing briefly at Liam, who was quietly playing with a stick at her feet. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the gravity of a lifetime of pain. A long time ago, she began, I had a family. A daughter, a son-in-law, and my sweet grandson. We were happy. Not rich like you, but we had enough. Until, she faltered, her voice trembling. Until what? Marcus prompted gently, though he suspected where the story was going. Until an accident, Eliza continued. Terrible one. A driver lost control, just like what happened to your wife. My family was in that car, Marcus. She paused to steady her breath, her hand clutching the baby's blanket as though it were a lifeline. I had a feeling that day, she said, her eyes misting over as she stared at the horizon. A terrible, gnawing feeling. I begged my daughter not to go, but she didn't listen. And then her voice cracked and she looked away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Marcus's throat tightened. He had never experienced loss on that scale, but he could feel the depth of her pain as if it were his own. That's why I came to you, Eliza said, turning to face him again. I don't know how I knew. Sometimes it's like the world whispers to me. I couldn't save my family, but I couldn't let the same thing happen to you. Her words hit Marcus like a tidal wave. This woman, who had suffered so much, had risked everything to save him, a stranger. I owe you my life, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. You owe me nothing, she replied firmly. But if you want to repay me, promise me this. Use the life you have to make things better for others. Marcus sat quietly for a moment, processing Eliza's words. Her story was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. He felt a pang of guilt, how quick he had been to dismiss her as just another beggar, assuming she had no depth, no story worth hearing. You lost everything, he said softly, breaking the silence. And yet, you still found it in yourself to warn me. Eliza nodded. Loss teaches you things, she said. It teaches you what matters, what doesn't, and how precious the things you still have are. Her gaze shifted to Liam and the baby. These children are my second chance. I've made mistakes, but I'll do everything I can to protect them. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. And how have you been managing? Living like this? On the streets? It's not easy, she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. But we survive. I work where I can. I rely on the kindness of strangers. And I trust that as long as I'm breathing, I can keep them safe. The baby cooed softly, and Eliza smiled down at him, her entire demeanor softening. Marcus followed her gaze and felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. This woman, who had been through so much, still found joy in the small, fleeting moments of life. I don't know how you do it, he admitted. After everything you've been through. Because I have to, she said simply. And because someone once told me that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward in ways you'd never expect. That's why I warned you. Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, he had buried himself in his business, measuring his worth by profit margins and acquisitions. Yet, here was someone who had found purpose in a single, selfless act. As the golden light of the setting sun bathed the park, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. I can't let you go back to living like this, he said firmly, his voice resolute. Eliza tilted her head, her expression cautious. What do you mean? I mean, you've done something extraordinary, Marcus continued. You saved my life. Possibly my wife's too. I can't just walk away and leave you here. I didn't warn you expecting a reward, she replied, her tone steady but kind. That's not why I did it. I know, Marcus said, holding her gaze. But that's exactly why I need to help you. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, as though trying to determine whether his intentions were genuine. Finally she nodded. If you really want to help the children, she said. They deserve a chance at a better life. I'll do more than that, Marcus said. He stood, his mind already racing with ideas. I'm going to make sure all of you have a better life. What are you saying? Eliza asked, her voice cautious but hopeful. I'll explain soon, Marcus said. But for now, stay here. I'll send someone to pick you up and take you somewhere safe. And Eliza, thank you. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a sense of purpose beyond his corporate empire. As he walked away from the park, he pulled out his phone, calling his assistant with a clear directive. Find out what it takes to get someone into a stable home, and do it fast. The next morning, a black sedan arrived at the park where Eliza and the children had spent the night. A young woman stepped out, dressed professionally but with a warm, disarming smile. "Mrs. Eliza?" she asked, crouching slightly to meet the older woman's eyes. Eliza nodded, holding Liam's hand protectively. The baby stirred in her arms, blinking against the sunlight. "I'm Ava," the woman said gently. "Mr. Albright sent me to bring you somewhere safe. He also wanted me to tell you this. Trust me." Eliza hesitated. She had spent years surviving on instinct, trusting few and relying on no one. But something in Marcus's eyes the night before had been sincere, a gratitude so deep it felt undeniable. "All right," she said at last. The sedan whisked them away to a modest but clean apartment in the city. The furniture was simple but sturdy, the fridge stocked with fresh food, and the children's room decorated with colorful bedding and toys. Eliza walked through the space in stunned silence, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Later that afternoon, Marcus arrived. He was dressed casually, his usual air of authority softened by a quiet humility. "How do you like it?" he asked, standing in the doorway. "It's more than I ever dreamed," Eliza admitted, her voice trembling. "But why are you doing this?" "Because you gave me something priceless," Marcus said, stepping inside. "My life, and a second chance to appreciate it. This is just the start. I want to do more for you, for the kids." "What more could you do?" she asked, overwhelmed. Marcus smiled. "Let me show you." That evening, he handed her a stack of papers, the deed to a house. It wasn't a sprawling mansion like his own, but it was warm, safe, and in a good neighborhood. A place where she and the children could rebuild their lives. Eliza stared at the papers, her hands trembling. I can't accept this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Marcus said firmly. "And you will. It's not charity, Eliza, it's gratitude. And it's a promise that your kindness won't go unnoticed." Eliza sat on the sofa in the apartment, the house deed resting in her lap like a treasure too fragile to touch. Her eyes welled with tears as she turned to Marcus. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. But I don't know if I can accept it." Marcus took a seat across from her, his expression earnest. "You're not just accepting it for yourself," he said, glancing toward Liam, who was playing with a toy truck on the floor. "You're accepting it for them, for their future." "But why?" Eliza asked, her voice cracking. "I'm just an old woman who happened to say something at the right time. Why go so far for me?" Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. You don't have to be rich or powerful to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is courage and compassion. You didn't just save me, Eliza. You woke me up. And I owe you more than I can ever repay." Eliza's hand trembled as she touched the deed again. "Feels too big. Too much." "It's not," Marcus insisted. "Not when I think about what you've endured, what you've sacrificed for those children." He paused, his voice softening. "Think of it as a new beginning, a way to honor everything you've been through and everything you've done." Eliza's hesitation lingered, but then Liam ran up to her, holding one of the colorful throw pillows from the sofa. "Nana, look," he said, his face lighting up with pure joy. "This place is ours." Her resolve cracked, and she pulled him into a tight hug. "Yes," she whispered, her tears spilling freely. "It's ours." The next day, Marcus took Eliza and the children to see the house. It stood on a quiet street lined with trees, a cheerful little bungalow with a freshly painted door and a swing set in the backyard. The children's faces lit up as they explored the rooms, their laughter echoing through the halls. Eliza, meanwhile, stood frozen in the doorway, her hand clutching the frame for support. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, stepping beside her. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I never thought I'd have something like this again. A real home." "You deserve it," Marcus said simply. As they walked through the house, Eliza's initial disbelief gave way to gratitude. In the kitchen, she turned to Marcus, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You've done so much for us. I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he replied with a small smile. "By showing me what really matters." Eliza nodded, her gaze drifting to the children, who were already claiming their favorite corners of the house. "They'll have a chance now," she said softly. "A real chance. That's all I want," Marcus said. "For them and for you." Later that evening, as Eliza settled the baby in his crib for the first time, Marcus sat on the porch, watching the sunset. When she joined him, she carried 2 mugs of tea, handing one to him with a small smile. "You've changed my life," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Marcus shook his head. "No, Eliza. You changed mine." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the moment shared between them. In that peaceful twilight, Marcus realized how much he had grown in just a few short days. Eliza's strength, resilience, and selflessness had inspired him to look beyond himself and see the power of true human connection. Eliza and the children adjusted quickly to their new life in the cozy bungalow. For the first time in years, they had a place they could truly call home. The change was profound. No longer did Eliza worry about where their next meal would come from or where they would sleep. Liam thrived in the safety and warmth of their new surroundings. He spent his days playing in the backyard, his laughter filling the air. The baby, whom Eliza had affectionately named Hope, began to flourish as well, her cheeks rounding and her cries giving way to joyful babbles. One morning, Eliza sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight stream through the window as she sipped her tea. A stack of children's books lay on the counter, donated by Marcus along with a box of toys and clothing. She reached out to touch the table's smooth surface, marveling at the simple luxury of having a home again. "Thank you," she whispered, though no one was there to hear it. Meanwhile, Marcus had begun his own journey of transformation. He couldn't stop thinking about the joy on Liam's face as he explored the house or the deep gratitude in Eliza's eyes. It stirred something in him, a desire to do more, not just for them but for others like them. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began making changes in his personal and professional life. He reduced his travel schedule, prioritizing time with Evelyn, who had noticed the shift in him. Their strained conversations became more heartfelt, and they found themselves laughing together again, a sound Marcus hadn't realized he missed. "You're different," Evelyn said one evening as they sat on their balcony, looking out over the city. "Maybe I've finally figured out what's important," Marcus replied, taking her hand in his. At work, Marcus launched a foundation aimed at providing housing and resources for struggling families. Inspired by Eliza's resilience, he wanted to create a network of support for those who had fallen through the cracks. He personally oversaw the initiative, ensuring it focused on meaningful, sustainable change. One day, Eliza decided to visit Marcus. She arrived at his office with Liam and Hope in tow, their presence turning heads as they made their way through the gleaming lobby. When Marcus saw them, his face broke into a wide smile. "Surprise!" Liam shouted, running to hug him. "Well, this is a sight for sore eyes," Marcus said, crouching to ruffle the boy's hair. Eliza smiled warmly, holding Hope in her arms. "We just wanted to thank you again. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," Marcus replied. "Seeing all of you happy is thanks enough." As they sat together in his office, sipping tea and catching up, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about giving back, it was about building a connection that would last a lifetime. When they left, Liam waved enthusiastically, calling out, "Bye, Uncle Marcus." The title caught Marcus off guard, but it filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between Marcus and Eliza's little family grew stronger. Marcus visited often, bringing books for Liam, toys for Hope, and sometimes just himself to share an afternoon of laughter and conversation. The house, once just walls and a roof, became a sanctuary filled with love and second chances. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus found himself parked in front of the bungalow. He had no particular reason for visiting. He just wanted to see them. As he walked up the steps, he noticed Liam's drawings taped to the window. Vibrant crayon sketches of a house, a smiling sun, and a tall man labeled Uncle Marcus. When Eliza opened the door, her face lit up. Come in, she said warmly. We were just about to have lunch." As they sat around the small dining table, the air filled with the scent of homemade soup, Marcus marveled at the transformation. Liam chattered happily about school, where he had made friends and discovered a love for art. Hope giggled in her high chair, her once thin frame now healthy and strong. "You've done so much for us," Eliza said as they finished their meal. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." "You already have," Marcus replied, his gaze soft. "You saved me, Eliza. You reminded me what it means to live with purpose." As the day wore on, Eliza and Marcus sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. The afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden light, and for a moment, all felt right with the world. "I used to think life was just about survival," Eliza said, her voice reflective. "But you've shown me it can be so much more. And you've shown me that wealth doesn't mean anything if you don't use it to help others," Marcus replied. "I've spent years chasing success, but none of it compares to what I've felt these past few months." Eliza smiled, her gaze distant. "Sometimes life surprises us. Sometimes the smallest acts, like stopping to speak to someone, can change everything." "Sometimes," Marcus echoed, his lips curving into a small smile. As Marcus prepared to leave, Liam ran up to him, clutching one of his drawings. "Uncle Marcus, this is for you," he said, holding it out proudly. The picture was simple but heartfelt, a smiling stick figure of Marcus standing beside Liam and Hope in front of the house. Above them, Liam had written in bold, uneven letters, "Family." Marcus's throat tightened as he accepted the gift. "Thank you, Liam. I'll treasure it forever." He hugged the boy tightly, then turned to Eliza. "Take care of yourself and them," he said softly. "We will," she replied, her voice steady. "And you take care of yourself too, Marcus. Don't forget what you've learned." As Marcus walked to his car, he glanced back at the house one last time. The children waved from the porch, their laughter ringing out like music. Eliza stood behind them, a quiet pillar of strength. Driving away, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. He thought about how a chance encounter had shifted the trajectory of his life, making him a better man, husband, and friend. The story ended not with wealth or power, but with the realization that the smallest voices often carry the greatest wisdom, and that the greatest changes come from the most unexpected places.